Welcome to the I Am One podcast, where we talk to perinatal mental health advocates, professionals, and educators supporting the mission of Postpartum Support International. We're not afraid to ask our guests about the hardest parts of pregnancy and postpartum because we know that PSI has tools and resources to help in every situation, and everyone should know about them.
Whether you are among the 1 in 5 moms, 1 in 10 dads, one of many trans or non-binary parents, or you're one professional or advocate committed to helping folks in need, you are also one of us.
I'm your host, Danny Giddens, and I am 1 in 5. I didn't know what to call what I was experiencing after becoming a parent and felt too scared at the time to speak up.
Not anymore. Now she won't stop talking about it. Hi, I'm your co-host, Emily Jankowski. I'm also 1 in 5, and I want you to know that mental health complications are common, but they aren't normal.
There's something powerful in knowing I am one of many. Whether you're already connected to the perinatal mental health world, looking for new ways to support parents and families, or just want to hang out with us in your earbuds, we are so glad that you tuned in.
Of course they want to hang out with us. We're lovely. Seriously though, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this pod are the speaker's own. Tuning into this podcast is, spoiler alert, not a replacement for therapy, but PSI can help you find a therapist. We could also help you find a psychiatrist, a support group, or Waldo.
Emily, Waldo? Come on! We don't know where Waldo is.
Okay, fine. PSI help seekers can find peer support and resources in their area.
At PSI, we want you to know you are not alone, you are not to blame, and with help, you will be well. On today's episode, we're sitting down with Kriti Lodha, a successful marketing leader in the business world whose entree into parenthood has turned her into a powerhouse of a perinatal mental health advocate. We'll hear about the dichotomy of feeling both isolated during the pandemic and supported by her South Asian community, and about the importance of raising awareness about postpartum psychosis as a treatable diagnosis instead of marketing it as a sensationalized character flaw. We'll talk about self-love, radical acceptance. We'll hear about some very serious moments and even some silly ones. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with our friend Kriti. Kriti, welcome to the podcast studio, friend. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Let's dive right in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what's your favorite pizza topping?
Sure. I'll start with my favorite pizza topping because I feel like that's more important than anything else I'll share today.
Oh, maybe.
I love fresh basil, just perfectly fresh basil on a classic Neapolitan margherita pizza. That is my absolute favorite and go-to. In terms of me, my name's Kriti. It rhymes with pithy. I live in the Boston area with my daughter, who just turned 3 years old. Her name is Nana. And my dog son, Simba, thank you, who's an Australian Labradoodle, and my partner, Kunal. Professionally, I have spent my entire career as a go-to-market leader and marketer, building and scaling businesses and brands and teams across both tech, but also CPG. So that's me. And then for fun, I love to cook and sing and apparently share my story on podcasts. So that's me.
Right on.
We love being your favorite pastime. Perfect. Kriti, can you give us kind of a little bit more insight into how exactly perinatal mental health disorders have played a role in your life personally?
Yeah, they've played a massive role. They've completely changed my life. They've changed my perspective on not just motherhood, but how I spend my time and energy and what is really important to me in life. And so it started off as a very dark journey. I had a fairly lonely, isolating pregnancy. In the pandemic, only a handful of people ever saw me pregnant. My own brother, who I'm very close to, never saw me pregnant. I was one of the first pregnant women to get vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson, 38 weeks pregnant. And there was just a lot of, anxiety and fear around that experience and all the parameters around it. And then really what followed was a pretty traumatic postpartum experience. What started off with a traumatic and long birth, 46 hours of labor and, some complications there.
Anytime.
Yeah, a lot of struggles and challenges with feeding and having to wean really within 24 hours, which is its own story because my daughter had lost a lot of birth weight and was having trouble latching, to eventually experiencing what I now know to have been a manic episode, not having slept for 4 days, and eventually psychotic episode for postpartum psychosis. And so a lot around that diagnosis. I felt like my diagnosis was my entire identity for a long time, both in terms of the symptoms, my hospitalization, my very rigorous treatment, medications, and really a long road to healing for a better part of a year. In fact, today marks 3 years since that experience. And so,
Wow.
I would say it really massively impacted me then, but I'm excited about what it means for me now. And so while I wouldn't wish this experience upon anyone, I firmly believe that it's made me exactly the mom I was meant to be to my daughter. And it's lit a fire under my belly to advocate for and give a voice for other birthing people or moms or family members that experience any form of trauma or perinatal disorders, mood disturbances across the spectrum, to really commit myself to that for the rest of my life. And my mantra is that if I can help even one person with my experience, or one person feel seen, seeing someone who looks like me, seeing someone who has seen love and light on the other side, this is all worth it. And I really want my daughter to grow up in a world where she feels like she has access to healthcare, to resources and knowledge that I just wish I had and I didn't at the time. Frankly, many other people have a very different story with my diagnosis. And so just really making sure that we collectively can remove the shackles of stigma, not only around perinatal mental health disorders, but in particular for conditions like mine that often get sensationalized. And there's a lot of misinformation around it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. What was pregnancy like for you? Was it a pretty normal pregnancy, like no major complications? And when did the complications kind of start? Was it postpartum? That's a couple of questions in there.
That's a great question.
Good luck.
Follow up. Third question. I'm just kidding.
No worries. Pregnancy for me, as lonely and isolating and scary as it was in the pandemic, was such a boon. I felt immense gratitude. And the reason being is I grew up with a host of hormonal issues. So no mental health history, but physical issues. So I had something called precocious puberty that I was diagnosed with at a very young age. I had PCOS and have PCOS. And so I spent my entire life wanting to be a mom and really believing that it wasn't going to be in the cards for me. And so to have gotten pregnant as quickly as we did, and then to really be in a high risk pregnancy, both because of my own conditions, but also some health history in my family with preeclampsia, I was honestly just I felt gratitude that it was as smooth and wonderful as it was. And in terms of when it all started, I think it started actually from the very beginning. I think my birth was really traumatic. I think I just was pushing through, pulling through, whatever you want to call it, for a while. But fairly early on, actually, part of my mania and my delusions were actually, I was convinced I had postpartum depression and I had the baby blues. And in fact, I was writing prolifically about it. And I still have the emails I wrote to family members that are like, basically a cry for help. Like, I might have postpartum depression. I need to find a therapist. I need to take a walk. And I was just like very angry and pretty sure I have undiagnosed postpartum rage as well. Like, really just like fearlessly advocating for myself, which is sort of beautiful and tragic at the same time, if you think about it. And so incidentally, I actually think maybe a week and a half in, I was hospitalized within 3 weeks, but a week and a half in, I knew I wasn't okay before anyone else did. Insofar as not only did I experience all those manic symptoms, but I even called 911 at one point. I apparently had a panic attack. I thought my partner was having one. That was my delusion, but I was actually having one, my first ever. Thinking we were both unfit to parent. And then, again, beautiful and tragic at the same time. This part always gets me, but my instincts were, I was actually arranging my partner to be my daughter's medical proxy. And I was arranging family members to be there. And I just kept saying, if I'm not unfit to be a mom, like, these are all the things. So I would say I, on some level, was maybe more lucid than people might think, even in all my delusions and paranoia. I was crying for help, both for myself, but really just trying to advocate for what I believed my daughter needed at that time and what I thought I needed at that time as well.
That is such an important point that you're bringing up, because I think you said at the beginning, there's like the sensationalized version or the newsworthy version of psychosis that is like the 1 in a million or 1 in a billion version of that experience, right? That's not the norm. That's the very much exception. And so the fact that you were advocating both for yourself, you identified something was going on, couldn't put your finger on it, or you tried to and were maybe like not accurate, right? And you were also thinking, like, I need to do what's in the best interest of my new baby. Now that you're saying that, I'm thinking back on other guests we've had, and that is a common thread for a lot of our folks who've had psychosis. They're not all experiencing this tragedy version that the news would have you believe is the case. It is very different than that. It is, in fact, the opposite. You're like,
Yeah.
I got to take care of this baby. Buckle up, right?
Yeah. And I will say, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for my partner, my mom at the time who was here as well. My cousin was a psychologist who I called in my mania, and my phenomenal OB who now I know didn't have a lot of the resources at her disposal or even probably the training to know what to do. And I think the other piece of what you're saying, Emily, is that we put so much onus on the mom and birthing people to take action and to know. And I think what both frustrates me and energizes me is that knowledge is power, but everything in this space, including what I went through, is treatable. My story could have easily been one of those news headlines out there. I just happened to have a lot of things fall in place for me. I had a community of caring. I live near and I had access to some of the best healthcare in the country. I was actually hospitalized, and then I went to one of the only outpatient mom and baby care units because they made sure I had to. And they made sure I had a psychiatrist when I got discharged, and I got the medication I needed at that time. And I think we put too much onus on folks to action it. And I remember actually listening to another one of your podcast episodes. It's like, did you Google something? And it's like, nor was I of sound mind to parent. But I remember at one point talking to my therapist where she's like, I would be careful about Googling things because of the trauma and PTSD that follows and the shame around psychosis. And so I couldn't even bring myself, even when I had a diagnosis, it wasn't until a few months ago, until I started getting involved with PSI and now getting trained on this, that I actually now understand more about psychosis than I ever did before. There's just so much. So I think there's so much there in terms of both the ability and the onus and the responsibility, but also all the trauma and shame that surrounds not just the physical symptoms you're having, but just the coping that you're having to do alone. As my therapist put it to me in one session, it's like you had open heart surgery and no one knew about it. And no one is there to cheerlead for you. It was only 3 months ago that most of my family or friends even knew about my psychosis. There's a lot to that as well. And so I appreciate you bringing up the fact that there's just so much of this meta narrative, if you will, around this particular diagnosis, but also so much judgment on what outcomes a story takes or what shape a story takes. And it's really biology, circumstances, and treatment. And while I can't prevent this from happening to the next person, it can happen to anyone. It is highly treatable. And so the responsibility is on all of us to empower others to have more stories like mine, and if and when the time comes.
Exactly.
I was wondering, Kriti, if you could kind of take us through what it looked like for you to be getting help. So it sounds like you emailed people in your close family acquaintance circle. Somebody was a psychologist?
Yes, my cousin.
Were any family members saying anything to you, noticing anything, or was it kind of you going, really just being loud about something's going on? And how did you get into inpatient? Tell us how the journey went with seeking help and receiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I am extremely fortunate and grateful to have an amazing family and community of caring. So while I felt very alone, I was never alone. And so I think it was a combination of factors. I do think that the cry for help or call to action, if you will, I drove a lot of it in the beginning because, again, we didn't have the information. In fact, I went back to my discharge packet and there was a little tiny blurb on postpartum psychosis and PSI. And I showed my husband, he's like, damn, how did I miss it? And I was like, well, because there were 20 pages on everything else. postpartum hemorrhage and lactation and all these things. And he was just like, and even PSI Massachusetts, which I'm now on the board on. And I was like, oh, wow, like I didn't even know about this.
Really? That is so interesting. That was on the paperwork.
Oh yeah. I couldn't look at all that stuff for a while, but in my own journey of healing now, I looked at it. But I would say it's a combination of things. So I do think I took a lot of action personally of communicating that I wasn't okay. I think my partner and my mom in particular, who were both at home with me at the time, because again, pandemic. So like we couldn't really have many people around. We didn't have the like friends and family visits. Took a really active role in like researching and trying to figure out what was going on. And my OB as well. So my OB was like fully accessible to me. I found out later that this was the first case of this kind that happened to her. She was the one who made the call, who was on the phone with my partner. And I think behind the scenes, my mom was talking to my cousin, who's a psychologist, and ultimately sent me to the emergency room. So I first went to the emergency room. I believe I was there for roughly 48 hours. And then the emergency room, immediately they sent me to inpatient psychiatric unit. So all in all, I was hospitalized about 10 days. And what was really scary in that time is because it was the pandemic, no visitors, nothing. You're fully masked, no fresh air.
Right.
You got 30 minutes of fresh air through basically a barbed wire on something called a fresh air porch for about half an hour. And it was a general unit. So I was around everyone, and I was separated from my child 3 weeks into birth. And then eventually was in outpatient care in Rhode Island, which was phenomenal. So then I was with a lot of women who had perinatal mental health disorders, and I was able to bring my daughter with me. But the medication you're on with psychosis, for some folks, you're in a brain fog. It's very hard for you to stay awake. I hadn't changed a diaper for about, I don't know, like a month into having my daughter. And so when I think about how I got help, there was like the medical help and then eventually my therapist. But there was also my mom, who was my night nurse to my daughter, because I had to sleep. Like that was part of my treatment. And then counterintuitively, I had to sleep at night, but then the day I couldn't, but all the medication made me want to sleep. It was things like my brother and his then girlfriend, now wife, coming to visit and like taking long walks with me, trying to help me stay awake. So it was a lot. I mean, it was about a year, I would say, of full recovery and treatment. Again, I had complications, but really, like, if I think about the people who brought help, it was my partner leading the way. It was my mental health providers and really taking care of me. And the last piece was the community of people that took care of my daughter. So when I was hospitalized for 10 days, some of my relatives came, they all came in shifts and they just like took care of her. And so the reason I feel gratitude is like, I was separated from my daughter for, a better part of 10 days. And mentally I was separated, you could argue, for the first few months of her life. And she was okay. Like she was in good hands.
Yeah.
So I'm very lucky. And not everyone has that story, but I would say I had a lot of support, as you can tell. And that's really why I feel compelled to give back and help those who may not.
Absolutely. Okay. So maybe PSI was in your discharge papers, but it's not like that's how you heard about PSI. Like subsequently, were you an inpatient when you heard about PSI? Were you an outpatient? At what point did PSI like come on the scene for you?
So if you want the honest answer, it was about 6 months ago. And I'm 3 years postpartum. The hardest part, actually, postpartum that I had to take responsibility of, not my healthcare providers, was finding a good therapist for really the talk therapy, if you will. And I had a really awful experience that I'm not going to get into with the first therapist I found that took my insurance that was available, that I was personally spending time researching when I wasn't even well and trying to parent. The one that I eventually found, who I still see, Erin, who's phenomenal.
Shout out
to Erin.
Yeah. The PTSD that followed, like, and all the grief and shame, that part of me in my own healing journey was finding ways to turn my pain into passion and really turn adversity into advocacy. I hate to use alliteration, but that's how I would describe it.
I love a good alliteration. Keep up the good work.
Yeah. Yeah. So we worked through it. But when I was ready and we talked about resources and ways I could get involved, she had told me about PSI. And so it was about 6 months ago. I was also at a crossroads in my career where I was thinking more about, where do I spend my time and energy and how do I give back in this space? And I did my research. And as Erin put it, I swung for the fences. I decided to apply to be part of the board. I had never interacted with PSI or postpartum psychosis survivor until then. And so I joined the PSI Massachusetts board, and that was in February now. It's now May, and I'm just getting more and more involved since. I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid and
Oh, it's non-poisonous.
It's the good kind.
I became a board member and now I'm excited to be trained. I'm actually going to start running the perinatal psychosis survivors group as well, starting this month. And
Awesome.
also excited to be leading the climb in the fall. So I'm just fully immersing myself fast and furious.
That's how Emily and I met you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the first time,
Yep.
right? Yeah, because, you're a climb leader. And we were like,
Yeah.
wow, she's a rock star. Let's talk to her.
Okay, so I think you've answered what you're doing now to support folks in the perinatal period, because the answer is a lot of things, which is incredible. I think that's a common occurrence for folks, regardless of the nature of the diagnosis, regardless of when they got diagnosed or how long until they found PSI. It's like we need to make meaning out of what we've been through. And part of that making meaning is trying to help in whatever way we can. We can't prevent someone else from going through a postpartum or perinatal mental health complication, but we can certainly at least try to normalize these conversations and help the people in their lives know what to do next,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think as someone who's spent their entire career as a marketer, I think for me, I really truly believe that awareness is a form of advocacy in this space. And so even just knowing that this diagnosis exists, knowing it's treatable, knowing these resources is so important. And I think it's really important that we don't inadvertently market shame around it.
Yeah.
I lost my mind. That is the honest truth. I lost my mind. I was not fit to be a mom. There might be people who Google me, let's say they find this podcast, who say, oh my gosh, she had psychosis. Like she must have had certain thoughts or inclinations. Or there might be people who don't hire me, right? Or make assumptions around what my health conditions are, or again, sensationalize. Or there might be other people who want to market my story for their own benefit. I just think that the reality is we can't let that get in the way of if and when someone Googles something tomorrow, if there's a South Asian woman or a woman of color out there who says, I haven't seen anyone who looks at me with psychosis, they know that I'm here. Or they know that conversations and dialogue, especially around psychosis, that tends to be even stigmatized even further in some ways, is the only way that we can make sure that people get access to healthcare. Like, I'm someone who really believes I've been a mental health advocate my whole life, but my understanding of perinatal mental health disorders was very, I would say, oversimplistic. And not to diminish those who experience it, but it was like, okay, am I experiencing thoughts of self-harm? Am I experiencing isolation from my child? Am I, depressed? I actually, with psychosis, you often have high moods. So I was very confident as a mom, actually, overly confident. And I was very actively engaged with my caregivers. And in fact, probably the only thing that gave me solace was singing to my daughter and holding my daughter at the time. And so I just think that it's bad enough that we don't talk about it, but let's make sure we don't paint this with a monolithic picture because everyone's experience looks different.
Yes.
And it's important that we tell stories of everyone's experience out there so that they aren't hearing it, 3 years after the fact. I want them to discover PSI. They should be schooling themselves on PSI just like they're schooling themselves on lactation or whether they want, what they want for their birth plan. They should really be planning. And when I say they, I don't just mean the birthing person or the mom. Mm-hmm. I mean the partner, I mean the caregiver, whatever that community looks like for that individual as well.
One thing that really stuck out in my mind, or that has this whole time that you said close to the beginning of this podcast, was that I don't know if you said that there weren't people that looked like you, or you want people to know that there are other people that look like them that have experienced this thing. Just like I didn't know other people were experiencing what I was experiencing because I didn't hear the stories. It's also important to just know that we're not alone for other reasons too. Like, oh, there's somebody that's like me in another way. Like they look like me that's experiencing this thing or has experienced it. Can you talk a little bit? Do you want to talk a little bit more about your experience as, a member of the South Asian culture and experiencing a perinatal mental health disorder, what that was like, why it's important for you to be an advocate?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us whatever you want to talk about. Yeah.
I know. I was thinking a lot about this, and I think the word I would use to describe it is duality. I think there's two sides to this coin. So I'll start with one side and then the other side. On the one side, from my personal experience, I think it played a big part of role of my support system and why I'm here. So what I mean by that is a lot of times in South Asian culture, unlike the Western part of the world, there actually is a very deep tradition in taking care of mom and in postpartum support. In fact, there's commonly a tradition across families that, my mom or a caregiver in my life, if, it's not my mom, maybe your mother-in-law, will come and stay with you and, take care of your nutrition and take care of errands around the house and all these things. And so that's like early on. So especially with the pandemic, like my parents moved in with me like second trimester, just to make sure we were like potting together.
Oh, okay.
I have to say, like, I want to give a shout out to my mom because honestly, I feel like she experienced the brunt of my rage in my postpartum experience. And like, I can't even imagine what she went through, seeing what her daughter went through. But she was, like I said, she was my night nurse, another parent to my daughter. She was a supporting person for my husband when his wife was hospitalized. Like, and then of course my in-laws and extended family members who all really helped, my dad, my brother, my sister-in-law, all these people who came together to help. So I think like that's the really positive side is like there just naturally was that infrastructure. When people say like, did you have any support? It's such a cultural part of the tradition. There were so many people already built in looking out for me and not just my daughter. I think on the flip side, though, I didn't realize how much I had internalized this concept of, in Hindi, the expression is log kya kahenge, or it literally translates to what will people say? And it's a very common kind of adage that's used in, Indian and South Asian culture. And I think there's two pieces to that for me. One was around breastfeeding. So a lot of the taking care of you and nutrition is around like basically making sure your milk production is healthy, that you're giving the right nutrients to your child, which again, best of intent. Like it's a wonderful thing that there's so much attention. That said, like when my daughter lost a third of her body weight and I had to wean within 24 hours, which between us, I'm pretty sure was a massive trigger for my eventual psychosis, I felt a lot of shame and honestly, a lot of internal pressure. Like no one was saying it to me, but a lot of internal pressure of like, how could have I failed at this? And, like switching my daughter to formula. I mean, to this day, like, even when I casually talk to other moms who are South Asian, like, and they talk about feeding and pumping, I'm like, not only could I just not do that because my daughter couldn't latch, but I was hospitalized and separated. I don't have a choice. Like my partner, like we had to do formula. And, I'm proud to say that my daughter is like a formula fed baby today and she's doing great.
She eats Cheerios off the floor just like every other baby, regardless of how they started out. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, exactly. As long as she doesn't eat my like dog's treats, which I have to always remind her, like this chicken's not for you.
Right. We're going to call it a win.
Yeah. I think the piece of it is that like, I mentioned this, but I didn't tell my extended family or friends until a couple months ago. And I'm a very open person. And so I do think there's this piece of like keeping all these things private. While that support was there, it was very private. Even like kind of downplaying like, okay, like she had something postpartum, but like, yeah, like we don't really know what it is or like what shape or form. Or even saying that I was in a psychiatric hospital, on some pretty nasty medications for a while. It's scary to talk about that. And I just think that a lot of that is just indoctrinated in this concept of like, what will people say? Here's this high achieving, high powered, South Asian woman who lost her mind. Like I lost my mind. That is a fact. And you know what? I'm proud to be here today. And I don't want my daughter to ever feel like she can't advocate for herself or her mental health or ever not experience psychological safety. Because I think that's so important, whether you experience a mental health crisis or not. I think it's just so important.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I feel like the cultural nuances are such an important part for so many folks. And I think the more that we hear about that, the better it's going to be for the entire perinatal mental health community. So thank you.
Of course.
Want to do a lightning round, guys?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm all about the lightning round.
Let's do this.
I'm a fast talker in case you haven't noticed, especially when I'm nervous.
Okay. First question of the lightning round. Besides this podcast, what's your second favorite podcast? Because we know who's number one.
Of course. So I really love this podcast called Rethinking by Adam Grant. He is a social psychologist. I was a sociology major, but he really just talks a lot about work life and setting boundaries. And just his whole podcast is around like challenging different paradigms. And so he interviews some really great thinkers around like, how do you embrace failure? How do you set boundaries? And he does it in more of like a professional context, which I really appreciate.
That's cool.
I am obsessed with boundaries. So.
Oh, yes. So am I. I was like 3 years of therapy and it's like boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. I'm all about the boundaries.
Yep. Yep. Healthy boundaries.
Okay.
Yep.
Question number 2. Are you binge watching or reading or listening, if you prefer an audiobook, to anything real good that we need to know about?
Okay, absolutely. I'm going to give a light suggestion. So, context, I am obsessed with Sarah Bareilles. In fact, she is who I listen to. Her song, She Used to Be Mine from Waitress, is like my postpartum psychosis anthem. I know it's not about that, but that's like, I just embraced it and adopted it. But I'm obsessed with her.
Yeah.
And I'm also obsessed with Tina Fey. And they have this show called Girls Five Eva that I guess was on Paramount, but like now is on Netflix. That's essentially like a 30 Rock style sitcom that's about effectively like the Spice Girls. It's basically this like girl band that got back together in like their 40s.
Well.
But like, of course, they're like phenomenal singers, like Renee from Hamilton and like Sarah Bareilles. It also has like Busy Phillips, who's hilarious.
I say oh no in a oh yes kind of way. Like I know what I'm about to be up to.
Yeah.
If you like really like bad, good music, or you're just obsessed with Sarah Bareilles, Tina Fey, Hamilton, it is fantastic. I've just been like binge watching that and it just makes me smile even on a hard day.
Perfect.
Well then, thank you. Okay. What is your best parenting hack?
Ooh, my best parenting hack.
This could be like a physical hack. This could be a way that you trick your kid into doing things you want them to do when they don't want to do them.
Psychological hack.
I'm going to go with like a funny one because I feel like this episode's been deep.
Yeah.
I've been deep enough, you know, it's time for me to go a little bit more surface level. So I was really proud of this past week, actually, I had a hack where I cook a lot. I love cooking. And of course, like mask all the vegetables. But my daughter, being a Taurus, is very obstinate and like everything has to be her idea.
No, I'm so sorry.
Oh, the Tauruses.
I know. And I'm a Gemini, in case you can't tell by this podcast.
Same.
Gosh, that's why we get along.
I know.
I'm an Aquarius. Okay.
My husband's an Aquarius. Okay, this is great. I had made this fresh tomato soup. Instead of asking her to eat it, I asked her to check if like she could smell it and if I had the spice level right and if I had put the right amount of salt.
Oh.
Because I knew she would like it.
Oh, you turned her into the expert.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, like, can you check the salt level, like Chef Nana? Can you like make sure that I like got, you know, I got the spices right? And of course she takes like a tiny, like first she like looks away. She takes like a tiny lick. And then she's like, this is delicious. And she ended up like eating half of it and like licking it clean. And it was like,
okay.
So I was like very proud of,
I'm going to write that down and I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Using her chef expertise to get her to have an entire bowl of soup that was basically like tomatoes, carrots, potatoes, which is like a win.
Gosh. See, that's where I'm going wrong. Like,
that's like how many vegetables I get in maybe a month in like one meal. So I was very proud of it.
I'm impressed.
With older kids, you could watch like an old episode of Iron Chef or something, right?
Oh.
And then you could be like, I need you to critique this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's quite right. I want Iron Chef level critique. Like my kids are judgy. They would love this.
That's a definite throwback to the pandemic. We did a lot of like Great British Baking Show binge watching and
I
like
love
cooking
baking
shows.
show.
I mean, didn't we all do that a little bit? And we got creative in the kitchen and the kids helped pick some meals out and cook them and stuff. And then people went around the table and I was like, that's enough opinions, okay? You don't get to... That's quite enough. Paul Hollywood. Like, that's enough.
Put on the noise canceling headphones. You'll be fine.
Also, you can get like on Amazon a really cheap like kitchen set, toddler friendly if you have younger kids.
Yeah.
And so like I just make her cut her own like vegetables and then she eats them. It's pretty great. It's like child labor and nutrition all in one.
Mm-hmm. It's so much fun and nutrition.
PSA, I don't actually endorse child labor, but only in my household. But
no. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, that's not PSA.
Yeah, the 3 minutes of cutting vegetables, I'm pretty sure is above board.
Yeah.
You know? Okay, what is one thing that today if you could time travel, are you a nerd at all? Like if I made a Doctor Who reference, would that jive for you? So if you like hopped in a TARDIS, went back in
I know
time,
I'm a nerd, but I'm also an immigrant. I didn't move to the States till I was 11, so I don't really know Doctor Who, but
Oh.
I like time travel. I'm all about it.
Star Trek. Like if we like, made a rift in the space-time continuum, it's fine. Never mind. If you traveled back in time and told yourself something that you needed to hear, like in those really hard moments, or maybe like once you started to recover, but you were like, is this going to be a slog? Am I ever going to feel like myself again? What did you need to hear?
I mentioned in the beginning that while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, it's made me exactly the mom I meant to be. And I think what it's had to teach me is the importance of self-love and radical acceptance. And so I think for me, really learning to radically love and accept yourself, show yourself compassion, set healthy boundaries, even with your own child or your partner or your workplace or whatever it might be, is the key. Like, I wish I had learned that sooner. But to me, like, really just the minute you embrace self-love, every experience, every quirk without judging yourself, and really just leading with compassion, which can be really hard to do as a mom and as a woman, it's honestly liberating. And I just wish I had like not waited for like losing my mind and a mental health crisis and therapy. I wish I'd found therapy sooner to realize that.
Oh, that's so lovely. Okay, well, I think the last question, this is an easy one, Kriti. If anybody's listening and some of your story, all of your story, a little tidbit of your story, anything has touched somebody and they're interested in like reaching out to you, connecting with you, what is the best way for them to do that? How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first and foremost, I'm looking to learn from other advocates, survivors, change agents, leaders in this space. And so I welcome anyone and anyone to reach out to me, and I'm trying to do the same and get to know others. So I would say the best way is actually connect with me via LinkedIn. So Kriti Lodha, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat and connect. Also, if you're listening to this and you are someone who's experienced perinatal psychosis, so that's either pregnancy or postpartum psychosis, as of this month, I'm going to be leading an anonymous, completely confidential, closed door PSI support group. So I'll be facilitating every third Monday of the month. So please feel free to join. It's a safe space, both literally and figuratively. I'm anxious and eager to just meet anyone I can and find ways to help others in this space.
Okay, I have one more question.
Oh,
Of course.
How do you take your water?
Oh,
Bubbles, no bubbles, ice, no ice, flavor, no flavor?
Yeah, it depends on my day. So actually, can I like add a third option? So generally, I'm like more of like a classic water. I'll do the bubbly sometimes, but I would say I'm like super big into like seed water. So like if you like boil water with like fennel, it's really good.
Oh.
Or like with cumin, it's a very Eastern tradition. And so I start every day with like a warm cup or a hot, like lukewarm cup of fennel water or cumin water or carom seed.
Probably super good for digestion.
Yeah, which
fennel.
my mom kind of encouraged me to do. And it's nice because that's like the therapeutic properties of tea. I guess like she helped me realize and other people helped me realize that, like when you just have water, you kind of like, you don't have to remember to go back to it. But like with herbal water, you can kind of like sip it and it kind of like has a soothing effect of tea. I'm like a big fan of that. So I encourage anyone else to try that.
Great.
If you're curious.
Cool.
You can add some new options, Emily, when you're like bubbles, no bubbles, fennel, cumin. You know, I don't know. How do you take it?
And from my South Asian peeps, they'll know what fennel water is.
Shout out. Yeah, totally. We're learning all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Oh, man, this has been a fantastic conversation. Of all months and weeks, we are in, kind of getting in the heart of Maternal Mental Health Week, Awareness Week. So this has been fantastic. Emily, would you like to take us out?
Okay.
Let's do it.
Kriti, this has been a joy because you are exactly the kind of volunteer that like PSI bumps into somewhere along the way. And you're like, I'm going to do as much as I can do with whatever capacity I have. And those healthy boundaries at the same time, you're like, how much of an impact can I make? I have really enjoyed hearing your story, hearing the impact of your culture, and also like hearing all the things that you are doing to help be maybe the resource that you needed the most for yourself way back when.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It means a lot.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to the I Am One podcast. Check out today's show notes where we'll drop links to all the important things that we mentioned in this episode. Please consider sharing about I Am One on social media and following and rating our show wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. It only takes a minute of your time and, well, that'll help our collective mission of bringing resources and local support to folks worldwide. From everyone here at PSI, thanks again for listening.